Hi and welcome to the Klotsen tutorial. My name is Zoran Stanic, I'm the author of the game and I will show you on how to start the game and a new campaign. So first things first, we will first need to create a new player. So we can call it, I don't know, ztest6. You can pick a campaign here or pick it up later, it doesn't matter. So once we create it, I would also recommend you check the other settings and play with this a little bit. Game is still in development, so some things look a bit rough around the edges, but we will improve that as we go. So next thing to do, this game can be played either as a standalone scenario or in campaign mode where you go from one battle to the next. In this tutorial we will assume that you are playing a campaign, so I will show you some basics around that. So you go to campaign and start new campaign. We'll pick this campaign 39, but of course you can start whatever you like. So once we do that, we are here on the game screen with some basic info on the scenario. And what is important is that this is a turn 0. We can't play now. This is a deployment turn, so you can deploy on these white hexes and buy new units and prepare for battle. Once you're ready, we will cover all those in later tutorials, but let's just show you around. So once we are in turn 1, you can start moving units around and try to win the map. Let's see these menus here. So basically you already seen me using the mini map. So yellow are the opponent towns and units, and green ones are yours. So it is very useful at the start to just get the general feel of the map and make some plan how to accomplish the objectives. As for the menus, this first menu here shows some basic info, state of the number of turns and amount of money you have, date, weather conditions, and the like. You've seen, this here. This one shows will take you to the main menu, or you can continue, and this one ends turn. Controls menu is the most important. When you click on a unit, some things will light up. In this case, few of those are not currently possible to use, but as you can see, undo move lighted up once I've moved the tank, so I can undo that. Keep in mind that you can only do this 3 times in one turn. Other things, if the unit is hurt, it's currently at 10-10 state. That means it has strength of 10 and supply 10, so it's in good shape. But if it gets hurt, you can regenerate unit. We'll get into more details later. Also, if the unit is standing on a supplied town, it can be upgraded or undeployed. And also, if it's on the railroad, it can be embarked on a train like this, or disembarked, of course. Also, for some units, you can load them into trucks to have a wider area of movement. As you can see, this cannon can move one hex in each direction, and since it has truck transport, if you wanted to move more, then it will move by truck. So in this case it will move on foot, and if we undo move, it can move on truck further away. Also, we have a sleep option, in which case that unit will be ignored when skipping over the units. Special action button, which is not active in most of the units, and also unit info button that can take you to the unit info. In this screen you can see the most basic information about the unit and the terrain it is on. On the left side is the currently selected unit, on the right side is the hover hex. So in this case you can check the info on enemy units or the hexes that you want to get to. These values, you will notice that they change. Scatter, we'll get to the more details later, but basically that's the part of the unit that is not taking part in the combat. Efficiency, that's supply state of the unit, and the lower it is, the less efficient unit is in combat. Defense is extremely important because most units that you'll encounter will be dug in and will get a defense bonus, and which will make them harder to kill. Information about hexes and strength of unit. HQ menu is also extremely important. Here you will be able to buy new units, get help for your army, do deploy, and overview the personnel that you command. So basically, manage units is where you'll spend quite a bit of your time. Here you can review, either purchase new units or review units that you already have. And you see all those options here. We'll cover that at a later time. Deploy units. Once you pass the first turn, which is deploy turn, you can only deploy on hexes that are supplied. So that means it is connected by railroad to the supply source, which is usually on the edge of the map. Also, we have a personnel menu. Here you see different commanders and their traits, skills. We will also cover that in more detail later. But here you can buy them and replace them. HQ help. This is sort of like calling help from headquarters. So in this case you can do all sorts of actions that will increase your odds, strengthen units, supply unsupplied units, and such. We will also cover this in more details. Ground air will change the view. So in our case, if we pick up a plane, you can either select ground unit or air unit with this. Supply, this is extremely important. You will see that which hexes are supplied, it can be picked up here, and also which are the supplied railroad hexes also. We'll cover this later. Also, you can scroll through units, either all or units that haven't taken part in any combat or haven't moved. And minimap we've already covered most of the part. I think it's self-explanatory. And of course, reports menu. You can see, for example, some combats that happened here and similar. So you can see in detail what happened when. Okay, that's the first part. We can now move to the next. Okay, we'll talk about transport next. So this is, for example, invasion maps. So there's lots of transports going around. Basic idea is that when you need to transport units over, say, water or by air, you will need to load them into appropriate transport type. So in this case, we have, for example, this naval transport, and we have an armored unit on it. Once we reach the shore, if there's no cliffs around, you can embark, disembark, and it will show you where do you want to place your unit. So you select which hex do you like, and the unit will be disembarked. In the similar fashion, if your unit is around the coast, you can also select and try to embark unit. If there are available naval transports, the game checks that automatically. So you press embark, disembark, and it shows where you can load your units into transport. So now this tank has loaded into a naval transport. Similar things works with the air transport. So basically, you have, for example, a unit that stands next to an airfield. If there are air transports available, you can try to load them. And please notice that in this case, unit can either load into an air transport or naval transport, so both will be shown. So we can pick either to load the units into gliders, transport planes, or naval transport. In this case, this is paratroopers, so we'll load them into an air transport. And once we've loaded them into an air transport, you select where to fly to, and in the next turn you can unload from the plane. Paratroopers can unload on any land hex that they have access to. You can't unload over water or really high mountains, but all other hexes will work. All other units that can be loaded into transport planes, so that excludes 60-ton tanks and like, all other units are able to unload into additional airfield. So you just fly to an airfield and unload over a new airfield, and the units will appear there. One other thing that is important is E button for quick loading and unloading. So this cannon has truck transport, so you can just point where you want to go, and it will automatically load and go there. Or you can, if it is loaded on the truck, you can just press E and it will automatically unload. This doesn't cost any action, so you can do that as many times as you like. Okay, we will discuss terrain and movement next. So mostly you will be using three different types of movement. That's leg movement, and wheel movement, and tracked movement. Leg movement is the basic movement for infantry units and artillery. Wheeled movement is movement by trucks, and tracked movement is movement of tanks and half tracks. All of those have their plus and minuses. So leg movement is of course the cheapest but the slowest. Wheel movement is superior to everything when going over roads, and track movement is very expensive, but you must have at least few units because most of the terrain you will be covering will be heavy terrain, and especially in heavy conditions like mud and snow, tracked units are basically the only ones that can move any distance. So we will first cover the tracked wheeled movement. So you will have this for example, artillery that has a truck. As you can see, it can move really far away, but only on roads. For example, if it needs to go through hills, it is much slower. We tried to model let's say the realistic approach to everything, so units will move in different conditions exactly as you would imagine it would happen if, for example, you imagine a group of trucks trying to move through, let's say, snowy hills, or the same thing accomplished by a tank or unit of infantry moving on foot. So all those have pluses and minuses. Naturally, the heavier the terrain, it will be harder to move, and unit will not be able to move as far. So in this case, you see truck can barely move in hills, but can go very far. But on the other hand, trucked movement will be able to move further away, but it is slower on roads. We model this by having different types of terrain, different movement costs, which also, as mentioned, increase when terrain is also muddy or frozen. What is also important to note is that rivers take a while to cross, so basically you need a full turn to go over a river. So for example, this cannon can only move to adjacent river, so in any other case it needs to move first up to the river, then spend a full turn moving across the river. So this tank can move on the river, but it loses a full turn. Of course, bridges help with this, so you can move freely across the bridges. So you can see them here. Weather and terrain condition had a considerable impact on military operations of World War II. One of the best examples is failure of German drive to take Moscow, and we try to model this in our game by having different types of weather and different types of ground conditions. So basically we have clear weather and dry terrain as basics, but then with the rain that can happen randomly on different days depending on the climate of the scenario, we can have terrain turn into mud, or if it's winter and there's snowing, into frozen terrain. As for the weather, we can have clear weather, cloudy, rain, and snow. So all those have different impact on military operations. Most impacted are definitely the planes that cannot act at all during the rain or snow. But the most important effect will be ground condition, because most of the combat happens on the ground, and you will see that in situations where you have few roads and mud or snow, tracked units will basically be the only ones that can move any distance. So this will be something that to keep an eye on and react accordingly. You will notice that some parts of the map are darkened. These are parts that are in the fog of war, where you can see the terrain but you can't see enemy units. All your units have a 2 hex view range around them, and also towns have 1 hex, but apart from that the map is invisible until you move next to it. So as you can see, we discovered new enemy units once we reached the fog of war. Okay, let's talk next about how to win map. So on the start of each map you appear in turn 0, which, as we mentioned, is deploy turn. Here you can't do anything but buy new units, refresh the existing units, and deploy them on map. You can do this on initial deploy hexes, which are marked like this with the double arrow. And it's a good idea always to check where are all the deploy hexes, because in some cases, as you can see, they can be in various places. So I suggest that when starting map, you start with zooming out as far as possible and just scrolling around the map and getting the feel what you need to do. Maps can be won usually by taking all the objectives, which are marked with dark yellow. Bright yellow are airfields and are marked just to make them easier to spot. And once you understand where all the dark yellow, that is objectives, are, then you can start making plan on how to take them or defend them regarding of your situation. So once you have a plan on where your units will move and in which sequence will the objectives be taken, then and you have deployed all the units, then you can start with the first turn. In this case, I've disabled the AI, so I'm ending the turn for the AI, but AI will do that by itself in normal game. So basically, once you're in turn 1 and you can start moving toward objectives, you need to allocate which units will go where, and you can see in which sequence you need to take them. There is also special conditions that in some maps need to be met in order to win a game, such as take all objectives and kill certain enemy units, or in some cases you can even win a map by not taking objectives but by simply reducing the enemy strength to say 20% of the original strength and such. So you need to read the scenario briefing carefully and to plan accordingly. On all maps you have a time limit after which you lose. This is the minor victory condition, so after 17 turns you will lose this map. If you finish the map before 13th turn is done, then you will achieve a major victory, which is something you need to aim for, although it is much harder, because major victories can lead to changing the course of war in a better way, and it will usually change a strategic situation on the whole front. This is the example of campaign 3. It consists of battles marked green and events marked yellow. At the beginning you have some events that are either random or player choice, and once you go through those, it starts with scenarios. As you can see, some events are really important. For example, Strengthen Africa Corps event makes you discuss with your HQ whether you will weaken Operation Barbarossa to strengthen operations in Africa. If you choose affirmative, you will go to the desert maps, Libya being the first. If you choose no, it will go historically, meaning you will go to Balkans and from there to Crete and so on. If you choose, for example, to go with Strengthening Africa Corps and go to Libya, here is a good example of how different outcomes of the map can lead to different future scenarios. For example, if you lose Libya, campaign is immediately over, so you have a pullout from Africa event, and Germans no longer fight in Northern African desert. If you go with minor victory, you will go to historical, where you are faced with Operation Crusader UK counterattack. However, if you do major victory that didn't happen historically, then you will be able to attack UK Egypt possessions and Middle East behind it. So as you can see, major victory here leads to alternative history scenarios that are pretty interesting, and major victories are definitely something that players should strive to achieve. Let's talk about unit types, classes, and different mediums. So as you can see, a player can fight either on land, air, or sea, and units are divided by medium and in each medium there are different unit classes, and within each unit class there are different unit types. So the most basic division is by unit medium. So we have either naval units, land units, or air units. You will notice this here changes. So these are unit classes. So in each unit medium there are different classes that are specialized for different roles. So let's start with the basic one. It's a land medium. As you can see, in land medium we have infantry, which is good in fighting in closed spaces, digging in, and is cheap. Also we have tanks, so they are specialized for open spaces, armored, so they can take a lot of damage. So let's say they are cavalry of World War II. We have artillery. Those are support units made to soften up enemy defenses before attacking. Tank hunters, those units are specialized for attacking tanks. They are usually either cheaper than tanks with less armor, or more heavily armored but without the turret, rotating turret with the cannon. Then we have anti-tank cannons. So these are basically just high velocity, low caliber weapons made for penetrating armor. We have recon units. They have a large view range, so they can see further into a fog of war. They are very lightly armored and will lose combat with practically any other unit, but have a very high movement. And of course we have anti-aircraft weapons, so these can be either static ones or powered ones. So these ones are maneuverable but more expensive, or you can buy static ones, or static ones with the transport. Lastly, we have armored trains that were used by some countries in World War II, but these often had only negligible impact on war, except in some tactical skirmishes. Apart from this, we also have air units. Air units are divided into fighters, so these are small maneuverable, usually one-engined planes made for fighting other planes. We have tactical bombers. Those come, let's say, in two major subtypes. One are just, let's say, larger versions of fighters with, let's say, more armor or more powerful engines, but definitely less maneuverable. And there are also, let's say, light bombers that serve the role of tactical bombers. The difference between tactical bombers and the level bombers is that tactical bombers carry usually much less payload, but because they are smaller than average bomber, they are more maneuverable, and they can attack from lower altitudes and with more precision. On the opposite side, we have level bombers. Level bombers were usually heavier planes, and they used level bombing or carpet bombing tactics, where usually they attacked from higher altitudes and just used the volume of bombs to make a chance of a hit, instead of going lower to the ground and exposing themselves to the attacks of enemy anti-aircraft guns as tactical bombs do. And lastly, we have naval component. This is divided into battleships, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, and submarines. Each of those had a specific role, where they were either made for fighting other heavy ships or hunting enemy raiders or fighting submarines or protecting the convoys and stuff. So basically, I will not get into the details, but the heaviest are the battleships, then heavy cruisers are roughly half the size and 1/8 of the firepower, and then light cruisers are again about half the size of heavy cruisers, and destroyers that are something like 15 times the displacement of the heaviest battleships. We also have a carrier that is simply sailing airfield, which carries attack planes that can either bomb ground targets or hunt other ships. In all those categories, we also have transport units. On land, we have a train that, of course, only moves on railroads. And also transport types that are either truck or half track to transport units that usually have a low movement, like infantry or cannons. In air, we have transport planes and gliders. Transport planes can transport plane units between two airfields or be used for paradrop for paratroopers. Gliders can be used for some lighter units like infantry and light cannons to land anywhere within the range of the airfield. As for the naval part, we have simply transport ships that are used to transport any type of unit by sea. Okay, so we've covered unit medium, we've covered unit classes, and now let's take a look at unit types. Within each class, let's say tanks, we have different, let's say, models of tanks that were produced. Each of those models had specific characteristics that made it special, and as war progressed, tanks really grew in capabilities and sizes. For example, Germans started the war with Panzer I, which was basically the tank they initially thought would be just used for, practicing war, but they went into war sooner than expected. So it was just a 5-ton tank with very light armor, with very light armament, just 2 light machine guns. And later on they developed much heavier tanks. For example, Panzer IV-D, it had I think 3 machine guns and a 75mm cannon, which packs quite a punch. So tanks different considerably, and that is described with these numbers here. So let's take a look at the numbers. So we have basically attack against unarmored targets. This is this one here. We also have attack against armored targets here. We have anti-air attack, and we have anti-ship attack, and also defenses. This is ground defense. This is defense against air. And also this is whether the unit is armored or not. So if it's true, it means it's armored. This is unit's movement. We also have unit initiative. So some tanks, for example, had very high velocity cannon that could hit units up to 2 kilometers away, and some could only reliably hit within a few hundred meters. So obviously the unit with the higher longer range will have the initiative advantage and will have a higher chance of shooting first. We also have a tank range, so this is just how many hexes away it can shoot. Basically only cannons can shoot more than 1 hex away. We also have a strategic attack. This is also important only for cannon and bombers. There is a unit price and how far it can see around it. So this is for land units. For air units, it's very similar to this with some minor changes. So we have a plane range. So this is how far a plane can fly around the airfield. And this is pretty much the only big difference. As the naval, we have some different numbers, so we also have whether it is a carrier, there is an anti-submarine warfare and torpedo attack. These are new numbers, and also ships don't get a daily supply. They carry their supply with them, so they have an ammo and the, let's say, supplies, but it's actually a fuel. So this is each unit type is unique, and it has a new unique statistics here.